So here's a side profile, and these are the 3 frontal profiles we'll be using as a reference. The first thing you notice with Johnny's side profile is his brow ridge inclination is a little bit more inclined than ideal. So you can see his brow slopes back about 24 degrees. I have it measured at 24.3 precisely. So ideal is about 12 to 23 degrees in men, and in women, I believe women tend to have flatter brow ridge forehead regions because their brow is not as protrusive, and it's clear why his brow bone is a little bit more sloped back and his forehead sloped back than ideal. It's because his brow is quite protrusive, and he also has a masculine nasofrontal angle. However, it's not as masculine as some of the other faces we've analyzed. His nasofrontal angle is about 127 degrees, which is in the middle of the ideal range. It's not overly masculinized, but also not feminized. Another flaw we can see is his facial profile is a little flatter than ideal. So this is his facial convexity angle, and it is about 177.2 degrees, and that falls outside of the ideal range for men at about 168 to 176 degrees. And anything outside of 175 to 165 tends to be a non-normal dental occlusion. So I'm not saying that Johnny Depp has an underbite. However, it is one indicator that would make us research other angles and just send him into the orthodontist to check. And that's what they would check. So there are other angles like the nasofacial angle and the nasomental angle. So this is the nasomental angle. And all of these are normal in Johnny, so I'd be inclined to say that he does not have an underbite, but that his facial profile is just a little bit flatter than ideal. Next, we'll take a look at his nasal width to height ratio, and that is this. So we set up these baseline lines. We take this measurement, which is his nasal protrusion, or his nasal length, and we divide it by his height. And his is about 0.8, which is in a study that I don't have pulled up right now, but I have references. I should actually link them in the description, which I will do. And that is the ideal pleasant range for men is about 0.68 to 0.88 in Caucasian men. Next, we'll take a look at his gonale angle, or his jaw angle. And that is also highly masculinized, like most of the other men we've analyzed. And his is about 115.4 degrees. I measured it here, it says about 111, but I'm not doing it as precisely, we're just going quickly. So yeah, here's about 114. Anyway, that is highly masculinized within the ideal range for men at about 113.4 to 124 degrees. Any of those jaw angles will produce an attractive jawline generally. And his ramus is extremely long, but ideal as a proportion to his lower jaw. So it's about 0.72 times his lower jaw, which is a 5 to 7 ratio, and that is perfectly ideal. That is a long ramus, and it's proportional and harmonious. And we'll see how that affects his frontal profile as well. It definitely helps. The ramus length is a completely underrated factor in facial attractiveness, and it often goes overlooked. It's probably one of the more core tenets of an attractive face. It's rare to find a hyper attractive face without a tall ramus, because what it does essentially is adds jaw body. It adds overall volume to the jaw. If you didn't have this much length, the jaw would just be like this. It would be much shorter and much smaller. And it is a masculinizing feature, so it's even more so attractive in men. One flaw that I do notice is that his lip to chin indent called the mentolabial angle, or the labiomental angle, is not as ideal. It's about 143 degrees to 150, and ideally you want to be about 108 to 117. Someone like Henry Cavill, for example. So you definitely want more of like an indent here. It just produces more attractive jaw shapes. In his frontal profile, he has some flaws as well. And that is his chin is overly weak compared to his philtrum length. It is about 1.81 chin times the philtrum. And it may be different in this photo specifically. What I do is I measure various photos and then I take the average. So either way, we can tell that his chin is not as long as it should be relative to his philtrum, and it does throw off his facial harmony a little bit. Next, his mouth width is not as wide as it could be relative to his nose width. It is only about 1.33 times, and ideally in men it should be about 1.41 to 1.56, and in women it goes up to the golden ratio, which is 1.618. So ideally his nose width actually is good. As you can see, it fits between the inner canthi, but his mouth width is a little bit short. As you can see, it doesn't really extend to the iris. It should go a little bit farther in here. Yeah, his mouth is small. That is one of his bigger flaws. His facial thirds are great. They're essentially ideal facial thirds. And that is his upper third is 32.5%. And his lower and middle third are both 33.75%. So you can see that his middle third is not the longest, and his lower third is the biggest, tied with his middle third. Ideally, his lower third would be slightly larger, but these are great facial thirds. They don't deviate too far from the 33% standard. And his next flaw is that his upper lip is a bit too thin compared to his lower lip. As you can see, it's not that ideal 1.5 to 2. It's about 2.5. So his lower lip is 2.5 times his upper lip, and ideally it should be a little less than that. See, it's just minor things like this that make the difference between a model face and a Hollywood heartthrob or very attractive face. Still just not a perfect face. And some could argue that slight imperfections also add a warming or a warmth effect to the face, where they just look more normal, not as much of an alien or hyper attractive. And I can see that argument being true. The next thing we'll look at is his eyes are quite close set. We noticed this among a lot of the men we've analyzed so far, actually. See, his interpupillary distance, or the distance between his eyes, is only about 43.6% of his total facial width. And that is quite close set, but not a harmony breaker yet. So as long as your eyes are not too close set, probably below 43 or 42%, then they don't really look that bad. And also, it doesn't help that his eyes are much less than one eye spacing apart. This is one of the bigger flaws in his face as well, and it compounds with his smaller eye separation ratio. So having the 2 and 1 really doesn't help. It just makes his eyes look overly close set. So one of his bigger flaws that deduct a lot of points is his eye spacing. His canthal tilt is perfectly ideal. It's about 7 degrees, 7.1 degrees. So a 7.1 degree canthal tilt is perfectly in the ideal range for Caucasian men. And his orbital vector is positive. As you can see, his eyes are deep set. Both from the brow bone, there's a lot of distance here, and from his cheekbones and his orbitals, they protrude past his eye. So his eyes look deep set, and that is an attractive quality. You can see that his gonion, which is this bone that connects the ramus and the mandible, so gonion, is below his mouth line, and that is an attractive quality as well, because it just shows how developed the jaw is, that this point is much below the mouth line. And he does have very good lip assessments as well. We'll take the Ricketts E-line, for example. It's called an E-line. And we can see that his upper lip lies farther back from this line than the lower lip, and that's ideal. In literature, it seems to be that the upper lip should be about 2 millimeters behind the line, and the lower should be about 1 millimeter. And that does it for all the things we want to touch on in this video. He does have a lot of other strong features as well. His neck width is good. Well, that's not really shown in these photos, but his neck width is reasonable and in the ideal 90 to 100% of his jaw width. And yeah, let's take a look at his final rating, which I said was the lowest, and that is a 71.61% and a point score of 7.8.